Welcome to this IFPMA media briefing on vaccines to combat COVID-19. My name is Claire Dool. With me are 5 leaders from the biopharmaceutical industry. And I think it's safe to say that this is the first time that we've had so many leading pharma executives all sitting together on a media platform. And there is great media interest. We've got more than 130 journalists joining us from all over the world today. So journalists, please do start writing your questions into the chat box. Give us your name and the organisation you're working for, and we'll take as many of those questions as we possibly can. But first to our speakers, and our speakers are going to be updating us on the progress in developing a vaccine, manufacturing and ramping up that manufacturing, and their vaccine for all. So here are our speakers. We have Pascal Soriot, Executive Director and CEO of AstraZeneca, Emma Walmsley, CEO of GSK, Paul Stoffels, Vice Chairman of the Executive Committee and Chief Scientific Officer of Johnson & Johnson, and Dr. Albert Bourla, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Pfizer. And our host, Thomas Cueni, the Director General of IFPMA. So Thomas, let's just start with you. It seems such a long time ago that the WHO declared the pandemic, March the 10th, I believe. How's the industry been responding since then?
It's actually not such a long time ago. It's only 2 months, 2.5 months, but the industry has responded, I think, in an unprecedented way. I honestly, myself, I have never felt so proud to be part of this industry, because what we have seen and what we will hear again today is industry leaders have expressed a deep sense of responsibility. We do know what the public health challenge of COVID-19 means, one which the world has not faced since the Spanish flu in 1918. We have already in March expressed commitments to work together in partnership among companies, but also with international organizations, with governments, because we are deeply aware that nobody can fight COVID-19, SARS-CoV-2 on their own. And we've seen that the commitments to sharing data, to collaborating, to reach out in partnerships with academia, between companies, with biotech companies, and with governments is really, we are walking the talk. That's why in April we became a proud founding partner of the ACT Accelerator, the partnership where you do have WHO, you have Gavi and CEPI, all working together with the companies and with the industry to develop a vaccine, to scale it up, because we also have a deep sense of responsibility that we need to help ensure that no one is left behind. Therefore, the notion of equitable, available and affordable is a truly important one. And I think all of us feel humble. None of us can do this on their own, but we are making progress and we see it every day.
Thank you, Thomas. Indeed, it's a collaborative effort. And let's look first at the science and research and development. Emma, if I can ask you, of course, GSK is one of the world's biggest vaccine companies. And what are you doing and how far down the road are you in supporting projects to find this safe and effective vaccine?
Well, thanks, Claire, and hello to everybody on the call today. So, as said, at GSK, we have a lot of previous experience in pandemic vaccines, and obviously a vaccine is going to be key to the world's exit from this very challenging situation. And for any COVID-19 vaccine, all of us need to be focused on 3 most important things. One, first of all, that it works. Secondly, that it's safe. And that it can be produced at scale. So in January, we've really started thinking very urgently about what was the best possible way for GSK to contribute to this massive scale problem. And clearly, the world is going to need several vaccines. So we decided that the best path forward was to offer our unique pandemic adjuvant technology to multiple partners, multiple candidates. This was important because it's a proven technology in pandemic situations. It's proven also to be safe as well as effective. And critically, it can boost the immune response and is therefore also antigen sparing. So therefore you can produce more vaccine faster, and that's obviously key in this situation. And we really believed, considering the contributions that so many different players, as Thomas has alluded to, can contribute, this was our best contribution to maximise chances of success and have real impact fast. So our approach to vaccines is guided by 4 key principles. Number 1, working in partnership. Number 2, taking truly a global approach and focused on keeping borders open for that. Number 3, commitment to access. And lastly, to make sure that together as an industry and with all our partners, we're really focused on further pandemic preparedness. And all of these 4 things require tremendous collaboration. So in terms of actual progress on specific candidates, we announced our first collaboration right at the beginning of February. Today, we've got partners in North America, Europe, and China who are all using our adjuvant technology. And that, of course, includes one of the other biggest vaccines manufacturers, Sanofi. And we're hoping dialogue is ongoing with other partners too, and we're hoping to make some further announcements in due course. We're seeing data in the coming months, and we're working with our publicly announced partners and others on opportunities to accelerate. And today we just announced our commitment to being able to supply 1 billion doses of this adjuvant in 2021. And that's on top of, by the way, 700 million doses of vaccines we supply for other diseases that need them to keep people protected around the world. And then beyond vaccines, which is, of course, the focus of what we're doing today, at GSK, like many others, we continue to work on antibodies and therapeutics because we think in all cases they will remain necessary.
Thank you very much for that update. And yes, let's explore later the manufacturing of all of those billion doses that you've announced. Just a quick question, Emma, about clinical trials. We're hearing a lot about Sanofi, as you mentioned, a rival, which you're now collaborating with. What's your time frame for clinical trials, and what type of clinical trials are you engaged in?
Well, as I said, there'll be more information on that in the relatively near term. But what we've previously announced is going into the clinic in the second half of this year and looking to be available in the hundreds of millions in the second half of next year. And as we've announced today, our capacity continues to expand for that.
Thank you. Yes, indeed. There's constant updates on this, on clinical trials and manufacturing. Let me go to Albert from Pfizer, because, of course, immediately the WHO announced this pandemic, you came up with a 5-point plan. It was about bringing all of your resources to the table for the collective interest. So could you update us on what you're doing collectively and collaboratively with partners at the moment to get a vaccine?
Thank you very much. And, from the first moment when we realized that the Chinese are building a hospital within 10 days, we realized that that's likely something different. And then very quickly, we also realized that this is not also a Chinese issue. It is a global issue. So as every global corporate citizen, we realized that we have, first of all, a role to play, which is to make sure that we protect the safety of our people working in different places of the world, and also the safety of the communities around them that they are working. But also as Emma said, it was very clear from the beginning that we also have a very different role to play, because Pfizer, for example, we are the largest supplier of hospital products, and we knew that hospitals are overwhelmed. So the second priority that we set, other than the protection of our people, was to make sure that we maintain supply for those that they need medicines, COVID-19 patients or not. And then also realize that we have capabilities and scale that very few are having. And we have a responsibility to put it to use so that we can provide a medical solution. And of course, vaccine was one of them. We issued those 5 points plan, which was basically a call to the industry, and at the same time a commitment from our side. So we're saying these are the 5 things that we want to do, and we would like to see everyone to do it. And I have to say that I have seen everyone doing it. I've never been more proud for the way that industrial companies, and 3 of them are, in addition to us, are represented here. They have responded to the crisis. And by the way, they are not rivals. They are competitors.
Exactly.
Rivals is only the vaccine. It's only the COVID, the virus right now. And I would add time as well, because we need a solution and we need it fast. So we, yes?
No, I was going to ask you about your fast solution, because you've got this novel technology that you're using, I understand, this messenger RNA technology. You think that this can accelerate vaccine development, but I understand that it's never been done before. So just perhaps a few words about that, about the science there.
Yeah. There are multiple technologies that right now are implemented, from very old ones all the way to very novel ones. And I hope that they will all be successful, because as we all know, we will need a lot of options as soon as possible. The reason why we've chosen the mRNA technology, although we have never, it's the first time that is used for a vaccine. We haven't registered vaccine with this technology so far, was because we have already 2 years collaboration with BioNTech, a German biotech company, that they are mastering this technology, and they are working with those 2 years with them on not on a COVID-19, of course, vaccine, but on a flu vaccine that has very similar characteristics. And we felt that right now we had enough expertise, we had enough scale, and the technology was offering speed, because you can go with an mRNA technology, you can do in weeks things that for other more conventional technology, you need months to do. So that's why we jumped together with the 2 of them. And actually, I need to tell you that we started working without having a contract with the 2 companies. We just said, this needs to be done. This is the right thing to do. Let's start working. We start exchanging information. We start exchanging materials. We start investing money. And after some time, we signed the letter of intent. And then we continue investing. And then after some time, eventually we signed the contract to commercialize. I think that, and I hope that the technology will be proven effective. We will only know at the end of the trials. So far, we have collected a lot of data, like everyone else, and so far, so good. But the end, it is what will tell us. The final trial will tell us if the vaccine is doing what we want, which is protect people from the disease, and if possible, also protect them from spreading the virus to the population.
As you say, Albert, you're going as fast as possible. Can you give us a time frame and where you are in the clinical trials at the moment? Yeah,
in the clinical trials, we are already in the US and in Europe in humans. We believe that these first phases will be completed next month in June. We will have enough data to progress to a phase 2 and phase 3 very rapidly. Eventually, we would aim to make a study of very large number of participants, 20, 30,000 people. We do have expertise in running very large studies. Actually, one of the largest studies ever was done in Netherlands by Pfizer, and that was the CAPITA study. We had almost 80,000 participants. And we are going to move very fast. And I know that you will discuss manufacturing, but it is critical if you want to have supply very quickly to be able to take a lot of risk and manufacture at risk. So to answer straight your question, if things goes well and we are all and the stars are aligned, we will have a conclusive or enough evidence of safety and efficacy so that we can feel comfortable and FDA will feel comfortable and EMA will feel comfortable to have a vaccine around the end of October. And if that's the case, and we are lucky enough, us and the world, to be having a vaccine proven efficacy so at that time, we will have done all the investments at risk so that we can start the manufacturing of it.
Thank you.
We will have already manufactured doses.
Thank you, Albert, for that update. Let me bring in Pascal Soriot from AstraZeneca, a different collaboration model with the University of Oxford. There's been a lot of publicity around that at the moment. Can you tell us about that partnership, the vaccine that you're working on, and again, give us an update on where you are in clinical trials, because I understand you're relatively advanced.
Yeah, with pleasure. First of all, let me tell you that just like you heard from Emma and Albert, we started thinking back in January, how can we help? And I'm sure Paul will share the same experience. And maybe a message for everybody today is, this is what a strong, healthy pharmaceutical industry can deliver to society. And that's why it's important to have a successful pharmaceutical industry so we can actually step up and help. And so back in January, just like Albert explained, with our exposure to China, we quickly identified that this was something very different. I was on video, 3-4 times a week with our Chinese team, and it was very obvious to me and to us that it was going to be something very special. So we looked at, we thought, how can we help? And so we have launched a series of initiatives like GSK, Emma described. We're looking at monoclonal antibodies. We are testing our BTK inhibitor, acalabrutinib, which is used for leukemia. We're using it to try and turn off this immune storm that kills people. We also collaborated with Emma's company, GSK, in Cambridge to set up an additional testing center, because in the UK, the government needed more testing capacity. So our two companies got together with the university and we set that up. And finally, we looked at this vaccine. And we were attracted by the vaccine because the technology has been tested before, and also because the Oxford group was very well advanced. They started immediately in January. And so we decided to partner with them. We finished phase 1/2 last week, actually, and we should see the results very soon, but the team and the MHRA have already seen the results. And as you probably saw, we've announced, or the Oxford group, the Jenner Institute, has announced that they are starting phase 2/3 in the UK in 10,000 volunteers. We've also announced that we'll start a large phase 3 study in the US of 30,000 volunteers. This is probably going to start in July or so. But we're moving at full speed like everybody else. We don't know which vaccine is going to work. And the good thing is we're testing different technologies. Paul and our companies have similar technologies. Albert has another one more similar to the one you must have heard of, the Moderna technology. Emma is partnering with different companies. So, maybe 1, 2, 3 technologies work and we have several vaccines, and that would be good. But we have to give it several shots because we don't know which one is going to work.
Understood, Pascal. Just a quick question, because you're quite advanced, as you say, with these clinical trials in the UK and coming up in the US. So people start to ask about clinical trials. And what about these human challenge trials where you actually deliberately infect patients? Is that something that you would consider?
No, I mean, we've talked about it internally and with the Jenner Institute, but we felt it's much too early. The ethical issues around this are yet to be resolved, and the process, the protocol by which you conduct those studies still has to be defined. And I suspect maybe at some point it will be done, but we thought it's too early because we still have a chance to show efficacy in a sort of a normal way, if you will, doing a clinical trial as you do with vaccines. Now, the problem we will all have, I think, is we are running against time a little bit because we see already in Europe the disease is declining. It's still going in the UK because the UK started later, still going in the US, but very soon the disease intensity, if you will be low and it will become difficult. So we have to move very quickly. And if the disease kind of gets to a very low level, maybe challenge studies will have to be considered. But we felt it's too early today to do that.
Thank you very much for that update. Let me bring in Paul Stoffels of J&J. Could you update us also on the vaccine development and the collaboration that Johnson & Johnson is currently developing?
Happy to do so. We started all in similar time frames. As soon as the genetic code became available early January, the teams got going, and we were able to build it on an existing platform, the At26 platform, where we have also done Ebola, RSV, HIV, Zika, and Ebola is now very far advanced with an EMA review as we speak in Europe. So very quickly, we first spent some time on selecting the right vaccine based on the right part of the spike, and we selected the DNA piece with the most immunogenicity. We have published in parallel also validated animal models. So they were published last week in Science, 2 animal models. One was a disease model, the other was a challenge model. And at the moment, we are now on the way to do real challenge studies in validated models to identify what the doses and whether we do prime boost or whether it can be a single dose. In parallel, working on manufacturing, as my other colleague said, it's very important that in parallel you start from the beginning looking into how can you upscale, because we are here against time. And this is a massive parallel activity where preparation for 1 billion vaccines next year has multiple parts. You have to do the drug substance, the filling, the vials, everything has to be done. And I can now proudly say that we are in place to be able to deliver 1 billion vaccine next year. With regard to clinical, we are planning to start early September, but at the same time, we are working very much in collaboration with the regulators to further accelerate to go from a phase 1, 2, and 3 very quickly. We plan to do 2 large phase 3 studies, as typically is required in the world to get to full approval, and hopefully that can be done in the north. If not, we'll have to go to the south. As Pascal was saying, the disease is now moving to other parts of the world. It will not be over when it's going lower here because we have very good control mechanism and it's summer. It's clear that in the south it's still going up very fast. South Africa, Brazil, and maybe other countries will follow. So this is not going to be over with, and that's why it has to be global. We have to be able to address a massive quantity. And as Thomas said at the beginning, equitable access to make sure that people can get access to the vaccines. We have an experience that with 65,000 people, which will accelerate. We also worked very hard on stability. We can bring a vaccine at 2 to 8 Celsius, which can then get into a normal system. And I'm sure that everyone is working on that. But in order to get into the Gavi countries and other parts of the world, you have to have the ability to make it, let's say, reasonable. In how it fits the vaccine capabilities. So good shape. We hope to have vaccine efficacy data early next year. That's the plan. We are working with several partners in the world. First, the regulators, I must say a big thank you to the regulatory authorities, which all work with us now on the day, on the hour. We have seen this in previous pandemics, like in Ebola, but now it's exceptional how the regulators all over the world work with us. The partnerships with contract manufacturers, but also other companies, they are exceptional. It is all a race against the virus, not a race against each other. So that's really, really good. And also a lot of academic partners, as well as healthcare institutions collaborating on the vaccine efficacy studies, because it's not just us. It's a big partnership with the healthcare institutions to get the clinical trials done and evaluate the products all together. And hopefully, in that community working together, we can bring an important solution for COVID-19.
Thank you very, very much for updating us on the developments. Let me just move to Thomas. Well, there are 4 of your IFPMA members, but is this the sort of sentiment across the Federation? What's the picture that you're seeing?
I think the examples which we heard from Albert, Emma, Pascal and Paul are really typical. The industry is really all in to fight COVID-19, and it's doing so in not just walking the talk, but also in many different ways. It's interesting when we heard the examples just now, it is collaboration within the industry, it is collaboration with small biotech companies, it's collaboration with universities, but it's also reaching out to international institutions, partnership with regulatory authorities. I have never seen something like that.
Of course, research and development, it's full speed ahead, as we've been hearing, but there's some way to go until we actually get distribution. Paul was talking about the challenges of some of the Gavi countries. What bottlenecks do you see going forward?
I think there are quite a number of bottlenecks, and that's why when I listened to these industry leaders, I felt among all of them also a humbleness. The challenge is daunting. It's just 2 days ago that I saw a chart which predicted we may need 15 billion dosages when you do a population-based study. On the other hand, as Pascal said, we are successful in flattening the curve. Therefore, it's quite challenging even to do the clinical trials. It is extremely challenging to scale up because when you look at the potentially 15 billion dosages, current vaccine manufacturing outside influenza, seasonal flu is about 5 billion a year. Therefore, we talk about huge investment needs and investment needs at risk at a time when nobody knows yet which vaccine will work. We do need also to agree on which candidates deserve to get priority to be moved to the next phase. We need the collaboration with the regulatory agencies. And last but not least, I think I sense a deep responsibility among the industry that we need to be careful about no one left behind. When we look at the scaling up needs, we do know we will not have sufficient quantities as from day one, even with the best of efforts. And as Emma indicated at the beginning, we need to be careful that the vaccines need to be safe and effective, and they need to be scalable. And the safety one should not be ignored and marginalized because vaccines are used on healthy people. When you use treatments, you are weighing risks and balancing risks because you are fighting for life of patients. And therefore, for us, it is important to be part of this ACT Accelerator partnership with organizations such as CEPI, Gavi, and WHO, because we are looking, and I've had so many approaches from many companies for advice on allocation mechanism. It is important that healthcare workers, irrespective where they are, get vaccinated first. And it is important that we do have this strong sense of solidarity.
Certainly. Well, I'm going to go to the journalists in a moment, but just perhaps a quick fire round to our CEOs about manufacturing, because everybody's talked about the fact that billions of doses are needed. So, Albert, I'm just wondering if you can very quickly tell us, how are you planning to scale up manufacturing and distribution operations to, manufacture and produce all of these doses that are going to be needed?
We started already scaling up, and right now we are planning to have distinct distribution supply networks in the US and in Europe. In the US, we are planning to use 3 of our current manufacturing facilities, and in case there is a need, there is a 4th one that we are preparing. Already, we started preparing materials, clearing the lines so that they can produce, installing new lines so that they can produce. In Europe, likely we'll do in our much bigger facilities in Tours, and we will collaborate also with the facilities that BioNTech in Germany are having. So also I need to emphasize that the technologies right now are, for example, requires minus 80 degrees storage while shipping, right? So it is a technology, but it is not very convenient for Africa, for example, because they will likely lack basic infrastructure that can be applicable. But we are working as we speak, although I'm sure that we will come to the Western world with this vaccine first. But as a second wave, we are working on making sure that we can develop and manufacture products that they are not requiring different that extreme temperatures with different technologies. And the last point that I wanted to make it is that typically we are producing vaccines in single dose vials. We are also exploring with governments right now if they could, if it could be more convenient if there are 5 dose vials, because that, or 10 dose vials, because if we can find out that this could be a presentation that it is acceptable and practical, given the pandemic nature, I think we can resolve a significant part of the bottleneck in manufacturing.
Thank you, Albert. Emma, as everybody's saying, things can't be done sequentially anymore. They have to be done in parallel. And you've made this announcement today about the 1 billion doses of pandemic vaccine. A few words on ramping up production and where?
Sure. I mean, this question of volumes and the need to get to volumes is all about driving access to get to as many people as we possibly can. We've committed to 1 billion doses that will be manufacturing in Europe, the UK and the US. And as data reads out, if we need to get to more, then we'll make sure that we can do that. But the other aspect of thinking about access is also making sure that we have, as Thomas alluded to, responsible pricing. That we learn from this experience. We're all learning across different industries. And I think this question of pandemic preparedness and with the multilateral organizations that we're partnering with, thinking about how we invest in that. And that's why we committed at GSK to invest any kind of short-term return from during this period in pandemic preparedness and donations to the countries that need the most. And that means preparedness in terms of rapid scale up, R&D into new pathogens so we get better detection systems, the testing and diagnostics journeys that have been challenging in many countries, but also increasingly ever warm vaccine manufacturing capacity. So we have it just in case, not just in time for next time. And then I think the last thing, just to re-echo also what Albert said, the last part of access that's so fundamental, and hopefully as many of us on this call and beyond are going to be able to produce successful vaccines at scale because of the fundamental demand, but we need to make sure the route to market and allocation is effective, which is really key to working with these forums like ACT and Gates Foundation and CEPI and Gavi. And I just mentioned that because reaching the people who are going to need it most, whether because they're the most exposed as frontline healthcare workers or the most vulnerable in these developing countries, is critical. Next week, Gavi have their replenishment conference hosted by the UK government, which is all about driving access, something that GSK cares about passionately, and we're fully supportive of this at a time when the value and necessity of vaccines and what we do as an industry is so obvious to the world.
And Emma, it's I think are on record as saying that it's a not-for-profit business at the moment that you're in during the pandemic.
We're on record as saying as we don't expect a profit during this period because we want to invest any short-term profit in pandemic preparedness and in donations, significant volumes of donations to the developing world, partnering with several of these multilateral organizations. You know, we are one of the biggest suppliers to Gavi. We've topped the Access to Medicines Index for 6 years in a row. This is right at the heart of what we do and our purpose as a company.
Thank you. Paul, a couple of words on manufacturing, and also I think that you've said that you're not going to take a not-for-profit business approach. So perhaps, Paul, a few words on ramping up production and this not-for-profit business approach.
Yeah, two ways to ramp up. It's one is we worked on a cell line which has a huge productivity, and that allows to produce like 300 million out of a 2,000 liter vessel on an annual basis. So instead of scaling up, now we are scaling out, and we are building plants in the US, in Europe, and Asia to have also access immediately to fill and finish facilities, because that's also a big bottleneck at the moment to be able to fill. And so, as Albert was saying, getting to 5 or 10 vaccines per vial is probably going to be essential to be able to cope with the volume. And that we have done stability at 5 per vial. We have done that with the regulators. That's possible, but probably need even to go further, because that will make it much more easy to distribute in the world, but also to, first of all, the capacity is not there to do it in the billions otherwise. Yes, we do it not for profit for the pandemic period, as we want to make sure equitable access over the world is important, and especially to get these vaccines to make sure we get a stop to the pandemic. And that's a commitment for the pandemic period where we will supply that all over the world at a not-for-profit price.
Thank you, Paul. And Pascal from AstraZeneca, just to bring you in, whether you could explain your plans to manufacture at scale and where, and also your take on the not-for-profit concept that the companies are pledging.
Well, I guess I'm going to repeat what everybody else has said before. I certainly can confirm what Paul said. We have the similar technology. So with 4 bioreactors of 2,000 liters each, you can make more than 1 billion doses. So the challenge is not so much to make the vaccine itself, is to fill vials, which sounds a little bit, silly, but that's what it is. And there's not enough vials in the world. So like everybody else, we're looking at 5 doses per vial or 10 doses per vial. So we can actually produce more doses with a limited number of glass vials that can be accessed. And the way we set up our manufacturing is very similar. We have a supply chain focused on the US. We have one in Europe, and we are looking at Asia separately. So we can actually provide this vaccine in a fair and equitable manner to everybody around the world. And finally, just like everybody else, we do it at no profit. And again, I'm sort of repeating myself, but it really should be a point that is not lost for the people who are listening to us today. This is what a successful, healthy pharmaceutical industry can do. And I know we are often criticized, but today, hopefully, we can show not only the 4 companies here today, but the whole industry is stepping up in different ways. Not everybody is doing a vaccine, of course, but in different ways. And that's what we can collectively do for society.
Thank you very, very much, Pascal, for ending on that note. Let's now go to some of the questions from the journalists. As I said, we've got journalists from across the globe who have questions for you. So let me begin, Pascal, with a question for you from Nature. Can you tell me plans for phase 3 efficacy trials? Will you participate in efficacy trials that aim to compare different candidate vaccines, such as WHO's proposed Solidarity vaccine trial? Question for Nature.
Absolutely. We have been in discussion with WHO, and suddenly the Solidarity trial is an option. It has to be set up, and we will participate definitely if we are invited to participate. I have to say our focus is speed and not haste. Some people confuse speed and haste. We're not proceeding with haste. We are careful. We collect safety data and the safety database that will be needed. But we're trying to move as fast as possible because the vaccine is needed, but also because we've said it a few times now, the disease is declining, at least in the Northern Hemisphere. And so our focus is on delivering the phase 3 program in the UK. We're also going to launch, as I said, a phase 3 program in the US, 30,000 volunteers. We also have a pediatric trial. We have studies in Kenya, in South Africa, in Brazil, in many other countries that will start anytime soon. So participating in Solidarity, yes, but right now we're sort of really focusing on getting something, a response. Maybe the vaccine doesn't work, but if it doesn't work, we want to know.
Absolutely.
And if it works, we want to be able to supply it, of course.
Of course. A question for Emma here. This is from Bloomberg. And AstraZeneca, Pascal, has previously said he's talking with the WHO, Gavi and CEPI about global allocation and distribution. Are GSK and Pfizer part of that discussion? Do you plan to participate in a global mechanism for deploying vaccines widely? And what obstacles and opportunities do you see in setting up something like that? Emma, the question from Bloomberg for you.
Well, as I said in my answer to your second question, we are absolutely committed to this question of access and deeply welcome the formation of ACT, which is this multilateral organization, which the IFPMA is part of, represented by Thomas. And it's absolutely critical that the whole industry is there because that is going to be a mechanism with multiple stakeholders in it, whether it's heads of state or organizations like CEPI and the Gates Foundation and Gavi and others, where we can look at, and the WHO, of course, where we actually look at these principles of access. And so clearly we're engaged in that as well.
Albert, just to ask you, because you were mentioned in the Bloomberg question, do you plan to participate in a global mechanism for deploying vaccines widely?
Absolutely, and we are already part of these discussions. And I want to take the opportunity to emphasize the role that Bill Gates is playing. This man is not only an inspiration for all with the way that he is using his profit for philanthropy, but also how focused he is on finding solutions. And he's a very big part of behind Gavi and behind all these discussions. I think speaking to the challenges, to be frank, what will be the challenges will be that every national government would like to get vaccine for them. And I think although there are discussions at WHO, reality is that governments will try to exercise all the leverage that they have to be among the first to receive vaccines. And us, I'm afraid, will be caught in the middle. So right now, my first priority, as everybody else's priority, it is speed. Find a safe, efficacious vaccine that we feel comfortable and we can have it by the fall. So when it is expected, maybe that the pandemic would come back to, let's say, the northern hemisphere. But so is everybody else. And I think that the US would like to have supplies. And then within Europe, not only Europe would like to have supplies, but the big markets compared to the small markets, the south compared to the north, all of that are the real problems that we are all going to face. So I'm thinking very carefully what would be the best way, okay, to make sure that everybody will get a fair share of the supplies that exist as quickly as possible, and that in this fairness we will not forget the unprivileged countries that likely commercially they play very little role, if any, but from the human perspective, they have equal rights.
Emma, you were nodding your head there. Did you want to add something to what Albert was saying?
I just want to reinforce a bit what many have said on the call, but how important it is that we have ideally more than one vaccine. And the really exciting thing that's going on at the moment is this mobilization of multiple companies, multiple partners on multiple technology options. And the easiest way to solve the allocation problem is to get to, if Thomas is right, 15 billion doses, or at least when you're looking at the world that needs to be protected, multiple billion doses as fast as we can collectively. This is, in multiple ways, a collective effort against a common rival, which is a overused word, but unprecedented virus.
Thank you. Paul, there's a question from DPA Germany, who's picking up on this idea of a pandemic period. What is the definition of pandemic period for which vaccines will be supplied on a non-profit basis? They're saying, is it until the WHO calls on the PHEIC?
Yeah, that's the assumption, but certain countries might declare it sooner over, but that is that's not an established definition yet. When the pandemic is over, it will be over. But definitely for the majority of the countries, it will be when the pandemic will be over, when the WHO declares it over. Yeah. I want to add something to the previous one there also, Claire, is that capacity and volume, getting fast is the best answer to allocation. Yeah, if we can get collaboration all over the world to make sure we make the investment now, and that's not next month. We have to start now to make the right investments. Then the allocation problem will be significantly less than if we wait another 6 to 9 months to start making decisions on volume commitments and making sure that the companies can get going. So speed is of the essence here to make sure we can try to solve all the high-risk group first, and then later the entire population when needed in the world.
Okay. Pascal, a question from CNN here. Given that AstraZeneca received more than $1 billion from BARDA, will the US population get the vaccine first?
I don't think it's a question of who is going to get it first. The goal is, as you've heard in the last few minutes, the goal is really to provide it to everybody around the world in a fair and equitable manner. So that's why we have set up independent supply chains, all of us actually. It's quite interesting. We haven't talked about it before, but we've done exactly the same. We've got an independent supply chain in the US, in Europe, and Asia separately, so we can supply everybody. And essentially what the BARDA is doing is placing an advance order for the 300 million doses that they think they need for the United States, for the US, for the US population. And, we are all in discussions with CEPI and Gavi and the European community and other governments to do the same everywhere.
Paul, there's a question from Reuters here. Once the first few vaccines are shown to be safe and efficacious and are available globally, there we are, we're projecting forward here, will the runner-up players likely switch to help with the production of the first-to-market vaccines? Or will the runners-up continue to pursue development of their own candidates?
Yeah, I think for the first at least 18, 24 months, you can't switch technologies overnight. Yeah, so if we start manufacturing for next year, it takes 8 to 12 months to validate what you're doing in your manufacturing plants and validate and get with your batches to the FDA, quality systems, etc. So it's not that you just switch suits or clothes. It's a long time, and so that's where the capacity everyone is building and making sure they have in the billions or the hundreds of millions. You can't switch that out overnight. The one thing what could switch out, not overnight, but more faster, is filling capacity. And so, when it comes to drug substance, it's like making planes, cars, and bicycles. It are totally different technologies which you can't switch out. Maybe some of them are somewhat compatible, but time to switching is at least 12 months. And that's where it's an utopia to say we can switch out overnight. So just a comment.
Understood. Question? Yes, please. If
I'd like to build on the point Paul is making, which I think is a very important point, is that this manufacturing process takes a long time. And my impression is that in some parts of the world, in some corners, some governments, some places, people sometimes think that they're going to get like 7, 8, 10 vaccines at the same time, and they'll pick one, place an order, and they will get it 2 weeks later. It doesn't work like this, of course. And so it is an important point for everybody to keep in mind. You need advance orders, advance purchase orders. People need to know what is needed so we can mobilize capacity. And there's urgency doing it.
Understood. A question here from German radio and ARD television in Germany. Albert here. Who will be the first of you to bring a COVID-19 vaccine to the market?
Science. Now, who will represent it, I think, is irrelevant.
That's a very diplomatic answer. I'm not sure whether it's the one ARD wanted, but let's.
I'm sure, but look. I will tell you. Look, our scientists, they have also their own pride. Everybody wants to be the one that brings it first, and I think that's very good and very healthy because gives an extra oomph, an extra trial. But really, this is about humanity, and we need to hope that everybody will be successful as soon as possible. And what I'm saying is science will be successful.
Let me put a question from the Philippine Daily Inquirer to Emma. Once the vaccine becomes available, how can low to middle income countries such as the Philippines be assured that they will be allocated the vaccine, since there are concerns that this be made available first to high income countries? Indeed, this whole idea, as we are seeing, of vaccine nationalism. But there's a concern there that the Philippines, as a low to middle income country, may lose out. What would you say to the Philippine Daily Inquirer?
Well, I would repeat what we've all been saying, which is I think you're seeing an industry that is committed to access. I think you are seeing a new forum that's been set up with the ACT Accelerator, which has got everybody necessary around the table that is committed to the notion of access. You're seeing each of us talk in different ways about the way we want to donate products in the right way to the markets that are described as low or middle income. And we have some very powerful other forces in play, whether it's Gavi or the Gates Foundation or the WHO, who recognize very much this as a global need. And what we all have to do is support multiple candidates to get to scale as fast as possible, because the best way to guarantee access is to have the volume available for all.
Thomas.
Actually, as Emma just indicated, in this COVAX COVID-19 vaccine accelerator, it's the industry as a whole. And the industry, of course, it's not just the association. It is senior leaders from the vaccine companies, each and every one of them. It is scientists from our companies, and they're sitting there with CEPI, with Gavi, with WHO, and with the Gates Foundation. As Albert said, the Gates Foundation really plays a crucial role here. And I think that is one of the elements in terms of ensuring that we will not be faced again with the situation which we had some 11 or 12 years ago with H1N1, where the rich countries bought up all the vaccines and antivirals, because the very notion of the initiative which was launched on May 4th by President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, with many world leaders there, is to have a mechanism where, notwithstanding the understandable interest of countries to serve their own citizens, you will have an allocation mechanism that those who need it most will not be forgotten.
Understood. Let me move on to ABC News in Australia, and a question for Paul. In developing a vaccine, how important is it to obtain data and information about the source of the disease? Is it the belief of the CEOs present that source was the wet market in Wuhan? I'm giving that one to Paul, but if anybody else wants to add to that, please do.
Well, it is important for us to get access to the virus, but I think we were very pleased to receive the genetic code of the virus early January from the Chinese scientists, which put us all on track to get going. And then a few weeks later, we all had access to the virus itself. So I don't think we could have done much better, maybe 1 or 2 weeks by having virus or having the code. But I think that was quite important. Going forward, we know SARS is not the first time we have a coronavirus creating a challenge in the world. 15 years ago, there was a coronavirus. At that moment, our teams did already research on that to see whether we could make an antibody, and that worked. And so there was a way already, we knew what to do. Going forward, we'll have to study very carefully what other type of coronaviruses have similar patterns, so that we can be prepared and have multiple versions of coronavirus vaccines or broad spectrum vaccines and therapies to prevent. For example, in Ebola, there are 4 strains. And so now the 4 strains will need to each have a vaccine in order to get to one Ebola vaccine. The more we know about strains earlier in the future, the better we'll be able to respond. So scientific basic work on pandemic preparedness is going to be essential to prevent this another time. And I think now the world is warned enough that that is now going to be a very high priority in the science world to identify potential risk coronaviruses, but also influenza and other viruses, because it's not just corona who could cause this problem in the world. Paul,
just to say, the second part of that question was, is there the data and information at the moment to say that the source was the wet market in Wuhan? I don't know, Paul, whether you want to say anything, or any of the other CEOs. That's from ABC News in Australia.
I can't say that definitely, and it's not our task to do that examination or research. So other people will come up with that information in due time. But I think at this moment it doesn't matter. We have to solve this disease now very quickly, and we'll find it out after we have solved the disease, and we'll write history then.
Thank you, Paul, for that answer. Albert, there's a question from Stat magazine. Has Pfizer signed contracts with individual governments at this point for delivery of first supplies of vaccines?
No, we haven't. We are in discussions with many governments about delivering vaccines, but we haven't signed contracts. And also, I think it's known that Pfizer is not taking any money from any government, not the US government or any other government, to advance our development efforts of vaccines. And we don't do that because we have a lot of money. We do that because we think that we believe we can move faster if we don't have to involve a third party. But no contract signed so far, but a lot of discussions with multiple governments, because as I think someone said it before, it is important to understand type of product that will be available, multi-vial or not, multi-dose vials or not, and quantities, so that you can plan.
So that was a multi-pronged question from Stat, but I know for AstraZeneca and J&J that you're happy to answer these questions offline. Let me, just because we've got so many questions flooding in from around the world, move to the next one, which is from the Daily Telegraph in the UK, which is a question for Pascal. The WHO is officially launching a voluntary patent pool tomorrow to collect patent rights, regulatory test data and other information that could be shared to develop drugs, vaccines and diagnostics. Is this something that your company supports, Pascal?
Well, and I have to say I was not aware of this initiative, and we would have to consider it, but I think IP is a fundamental part of our industry, and if you don't protect IP, then essentially there is no incentive for anybody to innovate. Now, what is important is that companies volunteer to provide their products at no profit, like we are doing right now in case of pandemic or crisis when it's needed. But I don't know that necessarily challenging IP or taking IP away is the solution to these issues. The solution to these issues is really to have a robust pharmaceutical industry that step up to help when needed and do it at no profit.
Thomas.
Yeah, happy to take that question, so to speak, on behalf of the industry, because as Pascal and others have indicated, I think one of the reasons we have been able to respond at such a speed in such a collaborative way is that we are starting from a flourishing innovation ecosystem, which is based on strong IP. Having said that, we are now confronted to a business as unusual, which means what I've also seen from many companies is a willingness to embrace, for example, voluntary licensing, scaling up, seeking partnerships. And we believe that we do have the mechanisms, we do have the platforms, for example, the medicines patent pool, which has played a very important role in HIV, AIDS and malaria, for example, has expanded its scope for the period of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we've seen companies, for example, with therapeutics, signing big agreements with the MPP for voluntary licensing so that you can scale up. I'm not quite sure, to be honest, that we do need additional platforms, because we already have platforms. The industry is already doing all the right things. And also, to some extent, I feel that the focus on IP, for example, in vaccines, shows a lack of understanding, because in vaccines, it's all about know-how. It is about the experience. It is about the ability of scaling up. And in the history, for example, of IP, there's never been a compulsory licensing for vaccine. Not for nothing. It really doesn't solve the problem. The industry is doing all the right things, which it is asked for.
Emma, you're nodding your head. Would you like to come in? And then Albert? Yes.
So just a couple of points really to endorse what Pascal said and Thomas. First of all, I think we would be right to say that IP is absolutely fundamental to our industry. And if our industry is mobilizing now, it's because of the investments in science and research that's been made with that support. But also, there's not, whether it be in HIV, which we participate in heavily, or in vaccines, there's not enormous evidence that IP is a barrier to access. Because, I think it's for 6 years now, you've been getting this licensing model arrangements in HIV to drive enormous access in the developing countries that really do face this challenge at most material scale. And you just look at the functioning of Gavi with tiered pricing in vaccines to see how, frankly, beyond clean water, vaccines has been able to have the biggest health impact on developing countries possible, whilst protecting the IP principles that allow us to invest in the advances of science.
Albert, you wanted to come in on the IP question.
Yeah, I want to say that I'm very respectful of the opinions of many people, of everyone. And as such, I think I'm hearing all the people that are speaking about IP. But I have to say that at this point of time, I think it's nonsense. And at this point of time, it's also dangerous. Right now, I spoke about, you asked me, the first question was about the 5 points plan that we issued, that we are here to help. I have in front of me yesterday's list. 487 biotechs or other companies reached out to Pfizer within 6 weeks to request help. There is a giant effort right now happening to find a solution to this pandemic. And the risks that we are taking is billions of dollars. And the chances that we are getting are still not very good, right? So it's not that we have a vaccine in our pocket. Right now, we are working to make a vaccine. At this stage that people are investing their billions, hundreds of biotechs, to find a solution, to have a discussion, keep in mind that if you discover it, we are going to take your IP, I think is dangerous.
Thank you, Albert. Let's now move to the USA and its science in USA. A question for GSK. GSK is the largest pharmaceutical company in the world which makes vaccines and is not making a COVID-19 vaccine. I understand that GSK is making an adjuvant that several candidates are using, but was GSK's decision not to make a candidate COVID-19 vaccine in any way linked to the company's losses from PH1N1 and Ebola vaccine projects? Emma.
No, and let me start. The short answer is no, but I should start by correcting. We're not the largest pharmaceutical company. We are the largest vaccines manufacturer, but one of many. And I really want to be clear on this. You know, right at the beginning in January, it was obvious, as we've all said, this is going to be an enormous global problem with, I'm just impact we've never seen before, including indirect impact, because we all know the indirect impact on health that the economic impact is going to have beyond the direct impact of COVID. And the question was, what could we uniquely bring with our know-how that others might not be able to? And that, we're now at over 200 candidate vaccines. We're talking about some of the lead and most visible ones that come from big companies today. But there are many candidate vaccines. Should GSK add to that list? Or could we increase the probability of success of multiple candidates by offering our adjuvant broadly to any credible candidate that comes forward, knowing that that's already worked in a pandemic? We've got new technologies that are coming through that people are working on, we've heard about today, but some of those have never been licensed before. Others not at scale for a long time. There are others that are proven, but might take a bit longer to get to. But we felt what only we could bring was this adjuvant technology that was a boost to multiple other candidates, and to be able to do that at scale. And that's, we think, the best contribution we can bring now. That doesn't mean we're not looking at other technologies, and frankly, pan-COVID opportunities further down the line. But in terms of fixing this immediate challenge, we thought that was the right way forward, very much in a principle of collaboration.
Okay. Financial Times, let me ask Thomas, because there's a direct question here, Thomas, for you, which was they want to know more about IP plans on therapeutics and vaccines and plans to license those technologies to expand access. What sort of further commitments can you make on the record, given criticism that some of those claims are vague? And what do you make of the Costa Rican WHO IP pool proposal due to be launched tomorrow? I know that you've already said some words on that. There's a specific question, Thomas, if you want to add. Will you be there, and will you be speaking publicly?
I think in terms of general attitude on IP is an enabler. We wouldn't be where we are without strong IP. And companies are doing all the things one would hope them to do. Partnership, responsive, socially responsive, willing to scale up at risk, and everything else you would want them to do. Also embracing the existing mechanisms on voluntary licensing. I don't quite see what the new initiative adds.
Will you be there at this new initiative that's launched tomorrow? The FT is asking.
I'm too busy.
Let's move to India, the Economic Times of India. Paul, you've spoken about manufacturing. Would you look at manufacturing tie-ups with companies from India?
Yes, we would. There is a lot of capacity in India, so we are actively exploring on what we can do, first of all over the world, but of course there's a very logic place for capacity is India, so we are exploring that.
Question from the Daily Mail in London, which has just disappeared from my screen, so I'm not going to ask that. I'm going to ask a question again to the people. There we are. Let me ask a question again, Paul, to you from Politico. How many vaccine candidates need to be proven safe and effective to ensure enough supplies for the world?
It's not up to me to say that the health authorities should do that, but we need several because, as Thomas was saying earlier, up to 15 billion vaccines might be needed, and not all candidates could go all over the world depending on features. So I think somewhere between 5 and 10 will definitely be needed to serve the whole world.
Thank you. Pascal, a question from the Daily Mail in London. If the scientists can't tell us who will be the first to bring a vaccine to the public, can they tell us when the first vaccine will be ready for use? Pascal.
Well, the hope of many people is that we will have a vaccine, hopefully several, before the end of this year. And the capacity will continue increasing next year. Both in terms, if those vaccines are successful, of course, both in terms of manufacturing capacity, but also additional vaccines coming available. So I think, if we could answer before the end of the year, hopefully we have a vaccine. That's what we are all aiming at and working hard to achieve. But we don't know. I mean, we don't know whether these trials will be successful or not.
Question for Albert from DPA, the German press agency. How expensive will vaccine doses be? Do they only reflect development cost or do they need to have a profit margin built in? Albert.
Look, typically the industry is pricing their product based on the value that they bring. And this is impossible to happen right now. In terms of pandemic, you cannot have pricing policies that they are respecting the offer demand type of rules of an open market, because the value obviously is tremendous that brings, so as a result the demand will be very high. So I don't know what will be the price of a vaccine because I've never thought about it. When we started the development, we never thought about the cost of development. We just opened the books. As I said, it's not because if we lost a couple of $1 billion that the development program will cost eventually. It's not going to hurt Pfizer. It's going to hurt if we lose it. But two things. One, I don't plan to lose it. I plan to make sure that we have a vaccine. And secondly, I don't think that the company will break. So that's the attitude when we enter into it. And I never even think, we've never put in front of us a projection of sales that has that many volumes, that many price. Never done it in Pfizer. No one so far. And I don't think that will be what will drive a decision about the pricing. And I don't think any government will worry right now about pricing. They all worried, in the developed world, they all worried about having a vaccine that is safe and efficacious, because it will be trillions that will be saved in the global economy if that happens.
Let me ask a quick question to all of you from Mint, India. In terms of sharing risks and technologies, will the companies be not charging royalties for their technologies? Pascal.
Yeah, we basically said we will do it at no profit like everybody else. So that's certainly a situation where we will not be charging any royalties and making no profit during the time of this pandemic. Okay. But, I think maybe let me add a quick point on, because we talk a lot about the cost of these vaccines, and quite frankly, as we supply them, they will be relatively inexpensive, probably a few dollars. Nobody talks about the cost of testing. And everybody says you have to test 100,000 people a day in Europe, in France, in Germany, in the UK. Nobody talks about the cost of this test. It costs about $50 to do one PCR test. So if you do 100,000 a day of those, it's 5 million a day in the UK or France or Germany. So the vaccine, at the cost we will bring it, which will be very low, is going to be incredibly cost effective. I'm not even talking about the lives you save, but in terms of the economic impact and also the cost you save by not having to test people so often to check whether they have the virus or not.
I'm just going back on that promise to go to everybody on that question, because we've got so many coming in at the moment, and we're nearing the end of our transmission. Let me go to the Neue Zürcher Zeitung in Switzerland. A question again for you, Pascal. Provided that COVID-19 disappears shortly, how much will the industry have invested overall in vain in the development and the scaling up of production?
This is a good question. I don't know the answer to this. You'd have to do a survey throughout the industry, but I suspect it's hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And I guess this and a lot of time spent by hundreds of our colleagues in our companies, people who could be working on other things and have volunteered their time to develop these vaccines. So I don't know the answer precisely, but it is a lot of money for sure and a lot of time from very smart people who could do other things today.
Let's then move to a very specific question. Paul, you were talking about this filling bottleneck. This is a question from Wired USA. Why can't glass vial makers just make more, Paul?
Well, I think at the moment they are making more, but they didn't also not foresee that COVID-19 was coming. So if you need a billion vaccines filled in five vaccines per vial, you need 250 million vials, and they are just not available. So you have to, they will scale up. But also these materials all become critical for every of the makers. If we go to 15 billion vaccines, that has never been done in history from a filling capacity as well as vials. So it's just planning now. That's what I was saying at the beginning, not next month. We need to start planning now to make sure that's all available. And it's not just the pharmaceutical the vaccine companies. Many suppliers need to join us, whether it's our reagents, whether it's single-use bags where we produce in, whether it is vials, whether filling capacity. All of them, they feed into what we are ultimately bringing to the customers, to people. And yeah, we all have to finance that. So it comes all to us at the end, the building the capacity as well as sourcing all the reagents, sourcing everything in order to get to that billion vaccines a year. And that's where hopefully the vial makers listen in here and also can start producing like we are doing.
Indeed. Albert, you wanted to add to that, I understand.
No, I was just wondering on the question about how much the industry costs. I think is going to be a lot of money, as Pascal said, but I know how much we are investing right now. And I know that so far, across all initiatives for COVID-19, that includes not only vaccine, which is the lion's share of our investments, but also antivirals or immunomodulators that could help on the disease. It's going to go for Pfizer only in excess of $2 billion, and most of that will be front-loaded, which will be the first year. Now, and that's I don't include in these costs neither the salaries of our people, because thousands of people are working on that. That's an already sunk cost. It's part of I'm talking about the out-of-pocket cost that we need to invest on top of our people to do all of that. So it's a major undertaking.
Understood. So I am about to take the last question, which will go to Thomas from Tagesanzeiger, and perhaps your closing remarks also, Thomas, which is how can the industry tackle the problem that governments which fund R&D activity to find a vaccine ask to be delivered first? How can we avoid a distribution fight between countries? Thomas, that's obviously been a big concern. We've heard that mentioned a number of times. Perhaps you'd like to answer that question and make some closing remarks.
Thank you very much. Obviously, this will be one of the most challenging questions. My hope is that we will find a good balance between, on the one hand, governments looking for their own citizens, but on the other hand, a big share of global solidarity. That's why our collaboration within this vaccine accelerator is so important of all the companies. And when you listen to the 4 companies present today, and they're just a small spectrum of the industry overall, we are in there together, and these companies will deliver. We will find a vaccine, and we will find a vaccine or vaccines in collaboration and partnership with others. That's why I would also like to actually draw on what Emma earlier said. We sort of deliberately did this global media briefing on vaccines the week before the vaccine summit, because quite often in COVID-19, you tend to forget that we need immunization programs every day on polio, on seasonal influenza, on children immunization. And honestly, Gavi, the Global Alliance on Vaccines Initiative, is by far the most effective global health program ever launched. It celebrates its 20th anniversary now. We are a proud partner of Gavi, and we really hope that Gavi will reach its goal of saving another 300 million children's life. And I think that's important that we don't lose out of sight. We do want to come up with COVID-19 vaccines, but we do need to also work on what's already happening. Concluding, I must say I was born an optimist. Therefore, I'm convinced with all the challenges, the question marks, science will win, and we will come up with vaccines. And in the meantime, we see in our parts of the world, and Pascal alluded to that, we can do a lot with social distancing, washing hands, and a lot of other things. Maybe more challenging to find the patients for the clinical trials. But honestly, I think we can do a lot, all of us, and at the end, science will win, and this industry will be a core part of the win.
Thank you very, very much, Thomas. Thank you also our leaders from Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, Pfizer and GSK for giving us your valuable time at this time when, as I say, the whole world is looking for a vaccine to end this pandemic. Thank you very much. Thank you, journalists, also for your very pertinent questions. You will find that this recording is now online and the press release is no longer under embargo. Thank you for taking part. Goodbye.